Today, we are continuing on the International Forever Book Club called The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. You see it here and you see it here. Today, we're going to go between pages 317 to 334. 317 to page 334. I enjoyed what I learned and heard in these mini chapters quite a bit. So the first one is called Freedom. And he starts out by asking the question, does the artist have a social responsibility? That's your first prompt. You can comment it below because we don't always have to agree with Rick Rubin. And I'm curious, do you feel like you have a social responsibility as an artist? If so, in what sense? And if so, what art are you creating that has that responsibility? How do you meet that responsibility? And if not, comment no and explain to me why you think the artist doesn't have a social responsibility. So according to Rick Rubin, no, the answer is no, and that the work of the artist serves its purpose independent of the creator's interest in social responsibility. So that in that case, the art serves its purpose no matter what it's doing to change people's minds or on an issue or to have an effect on society. All of that, he says, putting that at the forefront of your creative process and your creative goals, he warns that that can negatively affect the work. And he says that it doesn't even mean that the work won't have those qualities, but we generally don't get there by planning them. So if that seems like a riddle, then maybe it is. It's this concept that it's not that your work won't have lasting, deep, groundbreaking implications on society and opening the minds and hearts of people on certain issues, but he says if that's what you plan to do, it probably won't happen. I quote him when he says, "It's often more difficult to accomplish a goal by aiming at it." Now, this seems to shake a lot of the ground on which coaches stand on, or the self-development world stands on, or maybe you stand on, because often we think we need to aim at a goal to reach it. But in the art world, in the creative world, he says that it's actually often more difficult to accomplish a goal by aiming at it. Curious, right? What goals, comment below, have you aimed at and you reached them because you aimed at them? And then what things have you reached that you reached because you weren't as focused on the end goal? He says holding your work hostage to meaning is a limitation. How does that resonate with you? Holding your work hostage to meaning is a limitation. Art is far more powerful than our plans for it, he says. Art is far more powerful than our plans for it. So what I took away from this mini chapter is, if I'm so determined to affect my audience being society, in a certain way, then I probably won't be true to what the art is asking me to do for the art's sake and for the process. I won't be in all those things he taught us throughout the earlier parts of the book, where he said, be open, be curious, be intuitive, what's moving your body, what's moving your heart, where, all that trust and fluidity might go out the window as I am so locked into what this work of art needs to do for society. Interestingly enough, I have one piece of artwork in the works that is very aimed at opening people's minds about something. So this mini chapter got me questioning how I can be less attached to that outcome and more committed to listening to the art itself. So as we go deeper into the book, I feel like things are getting even more subtle, and he's asking more of us, because I think as a creativity coach, it's not often we hear people tell us what he's telling us in this freedom mini chapter, because he's telling us that the work comes first, not the effect it will have on society. Remember the mini chapter about our audiences and how they come third? Does anyone remember the order? It was inspiration, and then it was you. Was it you or was it the work? I think it was inspiration, then it was you. Yeah, it was you. And then it was the audience. So that flips things about just a bit. He says that art can't be irresponsible, because if we're so obsessed with being responsible with our art for a social issue, a social cause, and we think that our art must say something societally important or political, for example, then we might feel guilty if our art isn't clearly that. And here he says art can't be irresponsible. So don't even be scared of it. It can't be. It speaks to all aspects of the human experience. That is really cool. It does. It speaks to all aspects of the human experience. This part got sticky because I'm all about getting free of the constraints of societal programming and politeness. So check out what he said here. There are sides of ourselves that aren't welcome in polite society. Thoughts and feelings too dark to share. When we recognize them expressed in art, we feel less alone, more real, more human. There is the therapeutic power of making and consuming art. Art is above and beyond judgment. It either speaks to you or it doesn't. The artist's only responsibility is to the work itself. There are no other requirements. You're free to create what you will. Yes. I found this mini chapter to be very powerful, and I would like to hear below, who would you be if you let go of the pressure to create art that is, quote, meaningful, impactful, or that would change society? Even, the phrase that change the world, save the world. I was a big fan of that before. I thought that was all on my shoulders with everything I did in the world. And now I'm more open-minded, open-hearted to this approach, which is let the art be the art and trust, like he said earlier, that it can and will have that effect, but not because that's the tunnel vision we are giving it and the high expectations we're putting on it. Yeah. Okay. The next mini chapter is called The Possessed. I can quickly summarize this one because it got to the point quite clearly. And it said that we have been sold this idea through films, through books, that the artist is a tortured genius. That's how he says it here. Starving, self-destructive, dancing on the brink of madness, he says. And a lot of us have seen them be addicted to hard drugs, dying young, being complete loners, going crazy, cutting off their ear. Have we ever heard that one? And it says that this has instilled the belief that to make art, one has to be broken, or that the force of the art is so powerful that it breaks the master. And he says that neither generalization is true, and that these misconceptions actually have a very disheartening effect on the would-be artist, or recovering artist, as I like to call us, because there's this fear that you're going to go down that slippery slope, you're going to lose all control of your life, you're going to be unhealthy, you're going to be lonely, you're going to go crazy. I know I have and have had a bit of this one, more so on the loneliness front. And he says that actually artists come in all shapes and sizes and in a lot of different temperaments. And so he says to not put people in extremes, because there's the tortured artist, the starving artist extreme, and then he says there's also this extreme of the artist that is painted as always happy, always in flow, always perfect, and neither is the most. Neither is what it truly is. And he says that although many of us that are called to art struggle with an overwhelming sensitivity, here's the golden nugget of this mini chapter. He says that the creative process can have a therapeutic effect, a therapeutic power, he says. So that can actually be the balm, the water when we're parched, and what we need to process emotions, understand and listen to ourselves better. He says that creating art, and tell me if you agree with this, artist, in the comments below, it offers a deep sense of connection, a safe place to voice the unspeakable and bare their soul. In these cases, art does not unravel the maker, but makes them whole. Yes, 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 yes. So this was a shining light through the clouds regarding how the artistic process can be way more supportive to us than some of the scary Hollywood type of extreme cases that he's not saying they're not true. He's just saying that there's a lot in between that spectrum of the extremes. And comment below, when has art helped you mend yourself, make yourself whole? How has art been part of your healing process? And have you struggled with some of the extremes we hear here, or the starving artist, or the addicted artist, or the self-destructive artist, as he says? Have you gone through that? And have you found healing? And if you haven't found healing, maybe let us know below, because I know in this community we're here to help each other with ideas, with resources, and with a lot of love. Okay, the next mini chapter on page 325 is called What Works for You? And in parentheses it says believing. In a nutshell, this one's about the people who have superstitions. People who have to carry a little amulet, or knock a certain number of times on something, or maybe they like to work in the sunrise time. He says, if a ritual or superstition has a positive effect on an artist's work, then it's worth pursuing. So he talked about some myths, or possibly myths, he's not sure if they are, about certain artists and what they had to do, what they felt they had to do to align with their inspiration and flow. Like, for example, Charles Dickens carried a compass to make sure he always slept facing north. He believed that alignment with the electrical currents of the earth supported his creativity. That, we know about Charles Dickens, the writer. So he shared a few other creatives and the odd and interesting things they did to feel connected, inspired, and guided. And Rick Rubin says he's totally all about that. He says, artists have created in every way possible, at the extremes of chaos and order, and at the meeting point of different methods at once. There is no right time, right strategy, or right equipment. So open the doors up to trusting your intuition and the things that work for you. And he finishes this mini chapter saying that you shouldn't, and he said this before, don't try to mimic the process of others you admire. Trust your own process. He says don't ignore the wisdom of others. Receive that wisdom skillfully. Try it on for size, see how it fits. But at the very end, incorporate only what's useful, leave behind the rest, and the only practice that matters is the one that you consistently do, not the practice of any other artist. There is no wrong way to make art. If you want to comment that below in quotes, I would love to see that written over and over and over so that we can read it and make that one of our mantras. There is no wrong way to make art. And he finishes page 326 with that idea. Okay, the next mini chapter on page 327 is adaptation. This one hit home for me. This one reminded me of some of the coolest up levels in my creative processes. And here's how I would summarize this. He says something peculiar. And when was the last time you heard the word peculiar? I like that one. Something peculiar happens when we practice. So here he goes into this concept of how, as creatives, practicing is very different than studying another form of knowledge, and that you don't just read something, memorize it, and then say it again the way maybe you would do for a test on a certain subject matter. Here, it's a skill you're forming. And he says that sometimes part of the process is practice, and then part of it is rest, recovery. And so he says, I totally related with this. This was what got me quite giddy about this part of the book, because I'll tell you one of my up levels that came this way. So first I'll keep explaining what he says. He has a beautiful metaphor. He says, a difficult knot has untied itself. Boom, a difficult knot has untied itself. So he talked about those days where you're studying, then maybe you go to sleep, you're honing your skill, you're practicing, you go to sleep, you wake up, and then suddenly you have the skill. Suddenly it's easier for you. And I love that he's reminding us that there's a mystery to it. It's like when you're a kid and you suddenly know something or achieve something that you've been trying so hard to do. Remember tying your shoes, or maybe driving a car? Driving a car without worrying. Maybe that up level. Although I know that's not creative. I'm just using those as a reminder that there's some things in our creative process we are so impatient to get and we are hoping we'll get, and then it surprises us when we get it, and it's not always the consistent practice. And this might seem contradictory again to the self-help world, to the coaching world, because often we're told like, keep at it, step by step, consistency. And I'm not throwing out that out the window. I'm simply refreshed by Rick Rubin's reminder that there are skills that find you when you, like skill up levels, that find you when you least expect it. He says, it's not reading information and remembering it. It's more mysterious than that. You wake up one morning, transported to this new reality where you suddenly have more skill than you did before you went to sleep. The body has changed, adapting to the task it was presented and rising to perform it. He later says, we might call this the recovery phase. In weightlifting, which who's a weightlifter here? I love weightlifting and going to the gym, and it does apply. He says the practice breaks down muscle, and recovery builds it back stronger than before. The passive element of practice is as important as the active one. I hope that's your takeaway here. And in the comments below, the writing reflection prompt from this mini chapter is, where am I giving myself the passive phase in my practice? Am I giving myself the passive phase? How can I give that to myself? And things like, am I trusting that the skill is building even in between the practice? Give it some breathing room. It seems contradictory to practice, but I can attest to it. So I'm going to give you my story, and then I'll read you a couple more quotes from this mini chapter that I liked. Okay. So I was practicing my back bend. Those of you who are dancers or in gymnastics or are into acrobatics and things like that, you know, a back bend is like when you do this with your whole body, and then your hands are on the floor and your feet are on the floor, and then you make it looks like an arc, like a bridge. And I was working it to make it tighter and tighter and flexibility, like more flexible and more flexible. And I was working it every day. When it hurt, I was opening my shoulders. I was like doing all of that for weeks, almost every day, sometimes every other day. And it was a small amount of practice. It was like 4 minutes, 5 minutes. And I practiced capoeira on and off. And I went to what they call a roda. It's a circle where it's like a cipher, and there's singing and there's instruments, and you go in and you play or fight, practice this martial art. And I remember that it was the first time I went in to this team or this community. So I felt a lot of pressure on me. I didn't know what I was about to do. I was a beginner, and I went in. And you have to block, like in many martial arts. You can like kick, and you can attack, and then you defend. And suddenly, before I knew it, I was in a back bend. And that's a big deal for me, because when I said I was practicing the back bend consistently with some rest in between, it was just me on the floor getting into it. I had never gone from standing straight into back bend. Maybe as a kid, but like a toddler. I had never done it as an adult because it can be a little scary to let all that weight go back, and then you can hit your head. But suddenly I had done it, and I was so impressed. The funny part was I couldn't get out of it, so I was just like stuck, and I awkwardly got out of it. But it didn't matter at that point. I had shown myself and everybody that I had mastered that skill, and it popped up on me. It really surprised me, and I can attest to what Rick Rubin is saying here. I'm a mover, I'm a writer, so that was my movement art. Maybe for you it's something else. Maybe it's getting that note. Maybe it's like, what is it for you? Have you ever had an unexpected up level from consistent practice with some rest in between? I want to know. Share below. Okay, a couple more quotes I loved is, this adaptation process plays a still bigger role, one beyond learning. It's an aspect of the universe manifesting through us, a will to life. So the second part of the mini chapter that we were just reading, called adaptation, about the recovery process, the adaptation process, now he's making a way bigger message, conclusion, promise here, saying that it's the universe manifesting itself through us when we let these expansions happen. Here, I'll give you a little more information so you see where he's going with this. An idea gathers energy, building charge. Remember how we talked about those lightning bolts? Yearning to be embraced. We can hear it, see it, imagine it, but it may be an inch further away than we can currently reach. As we trace back over it again and again, more and more details come into focus, and we become wholly consumed. Our capacity grows and stretches to touch the idea that Source is offering up. We accept this responsibility with gratitude. Cherish it, protect it, acknowledging with humility that it comes from beyond us, more important than us, and not just for us. We are in its service. This is why we are here. It is the impulse through which humanity evolves. We adapt and grow in order to receive. These inherent abilities made it possible for humans and for all life over eons to survive and thrive in an ever-changing world, and to play our predestined role in advancing the cycle of creation, supporting the birth of other new and more complex forms, if we choose to participate. Do you choose to participate? That was like him going like this. You know, like on Google Earth or whatever, like giant GPS map thing, it's like, you're here, and then he zoomed out, and it was very cool because you're evolving the form of life as you let yourself expand to receive it. Whoa. Okay, last mini chapter, page 331, translation. Okay, here we go. Art is an act of decoding. We receive intelligence from Source and interpret it through the language of our chosen craft. And here he talks about how all languages have a different degree of fluency, and that our level of skill influences our ability to articulate or express that translation. So here he talks about how that there's not a direct correlation. It's a fluid relationship. When learning a new language, you may be able to ask a question, speak a beautifully memorized phrase, but at the same time, you may feel unable to share bigger ideas. So has anyone here learned a new language? I have quite a few. I love languages. And I can totally relate because he talks about how you might not be able to get jokes in that language, but you can say this other thing because you've zoomed in on that one. And when you're learning a new language, I have found it to be very vulnerable, and yet it brings you back to that childlike spongeness and vulnerability and humble humility. So anyway, this mini chapter was about staying a student, and he says the more we develop, expand, and sharpen our skills, the more fluent we become. We can experience greater freedom and less sameness in the act of making, and vastly improve our ability to manifest the best version of our ideas in the physical world. So here he's reminding us that it is so important to gain fluency in your skills so you can express the language better, express the ideas through the language. And I loved this one. He says, he was telling us that just because you can't do it now doesn't mean you can't do it later. I mean, it seems obvious, but I think a lot of us forget that skills can be learned, languages can be learned. And I'm not a fan of the people that say, after a certain age, your brain can't learn new languages. I haven't found that to be so. And same with creative skills and creative paths. Don't think there's an expiration date. If you feel unable to hit a note or faithfully paint an image, it's helpful to remember that the challenge is not that you can't do it, but that you haven't done it yet. Avoid thinking in impossibilities. If there's a skill or piece of knowledge you need for a particular project, you can do the homework and work toward it over time. You can train for anything. Let's make that another mantra. Comment below, I can train for anything. Or I just haven't done it yet. Let's put the yet in there, my friends. Let's keep on path. Okay, and then at the very end, he says that to hone your craft is to honor creation. It doesn't matter if you become the best in your field. That was also really reassuring. A lot of this comparison culture and competition culture, and with social media's ready-bake results, I think a lot of us think we have to be the best in that field. I still have a little bit of that programming, but I love that here he says that to hone your craft is to honor creation itself, and it doesn't matter if you become the best in your field. By practicing to improve, you are fulfilling your ultimate purpose on this planet. That's big and beautiful. By practicing to improve. How about we comment that below? How about we put that in our toolbox? I am practicing to improve. I am practicing to improve. And if you want to tack on the I am fulfilling my ultimate purpose on this planet just by practicing to improve, snaps all around. Okay, well, that was such a resourceful, rich, juicy, generous chunk of mini chapters. I must say that was one of the ones I enjoyed the most so far. One of. Comment below. What have you been liking? What have you been applying? Do you have any questions? Do you like this book? Do you want me to do more book clubs? Let me know.